Hello, everyone. I am so sorry I'm late. I lost the book. How is everyone doing today? My eyebrows don't even. No. Okay, we're just gonna fix that right now. Good as it's gonna get. How is everyone this morning? I applied. I got it. Well, I have a job interview on Friday, and I applied for this dental receptionist job. I've never worked in dental before, but the pay was like 18 to 25 an hour. And I sent this bomb ass cover letter in, and they right after they posted the job posting, they messaged me asking for a video interview. So I YouTube edited the video for the interview and sent it. So we'll see how it goes. So I hope that's what I was doing too. Hi, Talana, Charlotte, Shelby, Sherry, Alice, Carl. Are we ready to get on? I guess it would help if I put my microphone right here. I always forget that. Okie dokie. I hope everyone's doing well. So let's start. The first of the three dialogues that follows depicts sexual violence. As with the other sections about sexual violence, I am mindful here of Wendy Hesford and Wendy Brown's incisive analyses of the way graphic representations of rape and human rights work can place their readers in a position of voyeur, license the pornographic gaze, and, by making a spectacle of female victimization and powerlessness, inadvertently perpetuates the most powerful icon in the violent production of gendered identities, thereby resubordinating and historically subjugated through that identity. I include the passage that immediately follows nonetheless because of two things I want to emphasize about it. Things that illuminate both the psychology of the perpetrators and the meaning of the phrase comfort women, a historical reality still denied, distorted, ignored, and euphemized around the world. First, the long line of men participating in what could only be called institutional gang rape was not unusual for this woman. It happened so often that she had developed strategies for minimizing the expected tissue damage. And second, the story is structured to have a certain kind of punch, and the punch is about hygiene. The story is about disgust. There is a woman in the story as the veteran tells it. But insofar as this is an anecdote deemed worthy repeating, and it is one of those stories I know he told before, he told other people before talking to me, and he thought of it as a story. It is on a certain level not about what war did to this woman, but what the war did to men. I'm feeling good. So this is going to be a little hard. So this is a story from Kaneko-san. So let's get on. Kaneko-san said, soldiers were forming a long line, lined up, and the woman, what did she look like? She had her thighs open, right? She opened her thighs, and in this place, her thighs were open. She was lying down, and I was under her like this. And when I took off my pants, and she just rubbed me, and then I was done. And I was all done. Holding her and having sex, kissing, there was none of that. The woman just left her thighs open, and then a man would go in and just rub, and that was it. And so we just paid out 1 yen, 50 cents. For that, soldiers were all lined up in a row. Then on the way home, this is what I said. What the hell, you guys? You just left her like that when you were done? One by one, you didn't even wipe her off? Normally, after you do it once, you wipe her off, don't you? You didn't even wipe her off? Speaking harshly and quickly, I was angry. And then the woman apparently said to them, Mr. Soldier, if I wiped here, how many soldiers do you think there are? I just swell up here. It'll swell, she said. That's why I can't do it. That's what happened, you see? The interpreter said, did you yourself ever think something like, I feel sorry for these women? Kaneko-san says, well, I don't really remember about the time. No. Interpreter. So this is about the comfort stations. Do you believe that you raped the woman at? Kaneko-san, Interpreter. That you sexually assaulted them? Interpreter addresses him in honorific language. Kaneko-san says, I don't think so. No, because I paid money. I think that's pretty obvious. Interpreter. Yes, certainly. Now there's a gentleman that they're talking about named Yuasa-san. Yuasa-san says, and when I first went, another doctor, a superior of mine, said everyone should choose whether they liked and then disappeared into the room. What was left was, at the time, I thought, under 30, maybe 26, 27, a woman who looked to me like she was older than me. She was sad and alone. Turns out older people don't. They don't sell after all, huh? She looked pretty pitiful, and I took that woman by the hand into a room. Anyway, the place where the bed is, and there was a futon there, and then in the corner there was a sort of tool for washing your hands. Presumably she cleaned up there. And so we went in there and I asked her, "Why did you come here? I thought you came here for business." And then this was a Korean woman, and she said, "My older brother told me to come here." "Ah, is that so?" I said. And so for a long time I thought she had come because her older brother told her to. But that wasn't it. She just couldn't say to an officer in the Japanese army that she was tricked by the Japanese to come here. And so maybe that's what happened, I think. So what I thought all this time was so-called prostitution, I began to think I was mistaken. And now it says he's returning later to the same questions. The interpreter asks, "After you had gone, did you feel anything in particular about it?" Yuasa-san responds, "I guess it's to be expected. Americans, when we talk about comfort stations and the sort, they really put a lot of weight on the emotion and the feelings, don't they?" Interpreter, "Yes, as expected. So when you think about it now at the comfort stations, do you think that's rape?" Yuasa-san, "They were ugly, ugly, and you'd expect all I felt about them was that they were really disgusting, vile women. They seemed like vile women. They were sex tools. I didn't feel anything but that." Female visitor. I guess there's a female visitor in the room with an interpreter and Yuasa-san. And the female visitor says, "But you were asking whether it was rape or not, weren't you?" Interpreter, "Yes, that's right." Female visitor, "She asked if it was rape." Yuasa-san, "What?" Female visitor, "Going to the comfort stations. Do you think that was rape? That's what she's asking. Was it rape?" Yuasa-san, Ugh, I don't, I don't think comfort stations, he laughs, are rape. No. Nope, as you might expect, I don't think it's rape. I don't feel like I raped them. As a unclear, and now he's unclear, like it just says like unclear, like the action. As a, by the government, maybe it was a sort of rape agency. I don't really know about that right now. Maybe it was a kind of rape after all, rape station. It was a bit of a different flavor to it, doesn't it? I don't think whether it was a rape station. Well, maybe since they were smiling so much when they serviced us, I just don't know how to answer, but it feels like a rape station, I have to say. Female visitor, doctor, are you okay? Are you okay? Is your body okay? Yuasa-san, no problems. Yuasa-san again says, "Well, they were smiling and took us in like that, so I just somehow don't think it was clearly a rape station. They were smiling and sweet, using words like yo and everything." The interpreter asks, "Yo?" Yuasa-san responds, "A word for money you feel close, a word for someone you feel close to, Interpreter responds, "Oh, really? Oh, right, right, right. Korean. The Koreans say that." Yuasa-san says, "Right, and maybe they had to say that sort of thing, but I don't really think it was a rape station. I don't really know. I'm still thinking." Yuasa-san was born to a doctor's family, graduated from JK University School of Medicine, and worked as a doctor before, during, and after the war. He passed away November 2nd, 2010. He is survived by a wife, son, and two daughters. So these women were forced into basically government run brothels, and if they didn't service the soldiers, they would be killed or something horrendous would happen to them. So they think that just because they were nice, that they were not, it wasn't considered rape. But if you're forced into a situation to where you have to have sex with people, that's rape, regardless if there's a smile or not. And I can't believe that even during this interview that these people were trying to justify, well, she was a vile woman. She used honorific language. She smiled at me. She was pretty. All of these things to justify that they don't want to admit that they raped these women. And these comfort women are still asking for reparations to this day. As 2021, they still were. And the Japanese still won't admit that it was rape stations. So that's pretty sad. Kaneko-san claims to have not gone to comfort women often and not to recall many faces. But he remembers one woman vividly. He assumed she was Korean. That was the norm. But her Japanese was too good. When he complimented her language, she confessed to being Japanese. Kaneko-san was stupefied, outraged. How could a Japanese woman be in such a place? He left in disgust. Yoshiaki Yoshimi estimates that between 50,000 and 200,000 women were forced or tricked into becoming comfort women during the course of conflict. Some evidence suggests that the Japanese military decided upon comfort stations in order to reduce incidents of unregulated rape. Well, we all know that because of the Nanking massacre, that regulated rape stations didn't help unregulated rape at all. Hi, Susan. Where was I? In the document from 1938, the chief of the staff of the North China Area Army expressed concern that rape of local women was inflaming anti-Japanese antagonism in occupied areas, and therefore that establishing facilities for sexual comfort as quickly as possible is of great importance. But at the same time, Yuki Tanaka argues officers found rape a useful tool to stimulate aggression in their soldiers, sometimes providing them with condoms before embarkation. One U.S. intelligence officer recalls finding supplies of condoms regularly issued to Japanese soldiers. The wrappers had a picture of a soldier charging with a bayonet above the caption, Totsugeki, charge. A former Korean comfort woman gives this testimony. I was nearly killed several times during my time as a comfort woman. There were some military men who were drunk and were brandishing swords at me while making demands for perverted sex. They drove their swords into the tatami, the woven straw floor matting, then demanded sex from me. Afterwards, the tatami was full of holes from them driving their sword into it. The threat they were making was obvious. If I didn't cooperate, they would stab me. Meanwhile, in the same conflict, Tanaka writes, U.S. soldiers engaged in the mass rape of Japanese women. Young girls raped in front of their parents, pregnant women raped in maternity wards, and so on. In one 10-day period in the Kanagawa prefecture, there was 1,336 reported rape cases by American soldiers. Is mass rape inevitable in war? Every time there is war, there is rape, writes Catherine McKinnon. However, she continues, while rape does occur in all wars, both within and between all sides, characterizing rape as an inevitable outcome of war can nonetheless help perverse and devastating global consequences. In Serbia's war against Croatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, McKinnon explains rape was a weapon of war. It was genocidal. But for some time, the world was blinded in the fact because of the quieting effect of natural rape theory. If all men do this all the time, especially in war, McKinnon asks, how can one pick a side in this one? And since all men do this all the time, war or no war, why do anything special about this now? Notably, the Ministry of Education in Japan made just an argument when deleting reference to wartime rape in China from a 1962 textbook. They took out wartime rape out of the textbooks. The violation of women is something that has happened to every battlefield and every era of human history. This is not an issue that needs to be taken up with respect to the Japanese army in particular. So because everyone does it, why does it have to be in our history books that our soldiers partook in such vile actions? But what if rape is not a natural outcome of war? Elizabeth Jean Wood claims it isn't, pointing to the apparent relative absence of sexual violence on the part of the Tamil Tigers of Sri Lanka. Wood argues that even while the Tamil Tigers inflicted thousands of civilian casualties, they were able to control sexual violence through strict internal discipline and a system of brutal punishment. She speculates that there are other paths to limited sexual violence during wartime, but to find them, we must first believe they exist. We must insist, in other words, that why is a serious question with specific answers and not a rhetorical gesture. Why do soldiers rape women? One common answer is the pressure cooker theory of rape. Soldiers rape because they need sex. Society acts as a hindrance to males' natural bestial sexual behavior, a hinder which is often removed in the climate of warring. But most scholars reject this idea, summarizing why rape as lust is empirically implausible. Wood writes, the model cannot account for the frequently observed targeting of particular groups of women, nor the often extreme violence that frequently accompanies wartime rape, nor the occurrence of non-rape sexual torture. And if this argument was complete, we would not see rape by forces with ample access to prostitutes. This is certainly not always the case. I know, Shelby, isn't that disgusting? Most scholars today favor theories of rape that emphasize features like violence, competition, and insecurity instead of desire. Summarizing their interviews with perpetrators from the state military or organization of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Maria Erickson Boz and Maria Stern explain, the soldiers explicitly linked their rationale for rape with their inabilities or failures to inhabit certain idealized notions of heterosexual manhood. In their study of police torturers in Brazil, Martha Huggins, Mika Haritos Futuros, and Philip Zimbardo pay special attention to cultural constructions of masculinity. In patriarchal cultures, they explain, masculinity is both a performance and a contest with winners and losers, where identity is at stake. The competitiveness is such masculinity turns quickly to aggression, they write, because few men are able to successfully demonstrate their masculinity constantly within a system of pervasive competition over scarce and elusive masculinity resources. As a veteran of the Vietnam explained of wartime rape, they only do it when there are a lot of guys around. It makes them feel good. They show each other what they can do. I can do it. They won't do it by themselves. The brutal performance of such manhood extends beyond battlefield violence into the very structuring of the interior self. It is a performance that one does not know one is performing, that one performs for oneself. Sandra Whitworth provides an example. Male soldiers who experience PTSD discover they have not successfully obliterated the feminine other and indeed risk becoming women. As Lisa Venton writes, the masculinity affirmed by the process of most contemporary military training is a fragile one, entirely unable to tolerate traces of femininity. When the stoic, tough, emotionless soldier begins to feel and react, when he feels pain, fear, anxiety, guilt, shame, and despair as a result of the activities in which he participated as a soldier, he violates the precepts of his military identity and can no longer fulfill the myths of militarized manhood that have shaped him. That makes actually a lot of sense. A lot of sense. A good amount of contemporary academic thinking about masculinity and sexual violence relies on one version or another of this basic model. A masculine, as distinct from male identity, is a fragile construct forever policing itself for signs of the feminine. Late 1970s and 1980s feminist psychoanalytic work on the institution of exclusively female caregiving remains seminal for the field of inquiry. As Nancy Chodoro writes, in patriarchal societies where fathers are distant, an infant's experience of being starts as a total fusion with the mother. Mother is the external ego, the child's origin and limit. For boys, importantly, it is against their original union that a sense of masculinity arises. His emerging social identity must prove itself against his primary former relationship. Indeed, while the daughter's gendered self develops in relation to the present mother, the son's gendered self develops in relation to an absent father. Masculinity, Chodoro argues, is therefore elusive, constructed, largely in negative terms. The self is a matter of knots, not dependent upon his mother, not constrained by identification with her, not defined by attachment. Identity conceived thus as a dyadic struggles generates, in Freud's words, the contempt felt by a man for a sex which is the lesser. When we have come to consider the normal male contempt for women, writes Jessica Benjamin, the vulnerability of masculinity that is forged in the crucible of femininity, the great risk of separation that is so seldom completed, lays the groundwork for the later objectification of women. Hi, Debbie. That's interesting, isn't it? That you think that like houses with absent fathers, that the son's whole origin and being is with its mother, and then they have to become something that wasn't there, and they're told what not to be, but not what they should be because the dad's not there, and it's society giving the ideas of what they should be, not so. It's like sexuality is like, I mean, gender norms is like a social construct. Interesting. The psychic work of a male child in a patriarchal societies requires internalizing a stable masculinity and voiding his femininity. This, as it turns out, is a lifelong task. While a boy will quickly learn to inhibit feminine behaviors in order to avoid punishment, he might nonetheless find it impossible to avoid thinking about or wishing to act feminine. Since for a child it is often difficult to maintain a strong internal sense of the difference between wishing and doing, between fantasizing and acting, the male child will continue to feel anxiety about gendered behavior patterns long after he has apparently internalized them. He will continue to harbor a secret, unspeakable self-doubt, namely that he is, deep inside, nothing better than a dirty girl. That's interesting, after all. Among other things, this is a core logic of pornography, which is, like drugs and alcohol, part of the equipment of war. Susan Griffin argues it is the female aspect of the self who is punished in pornography, punished and then blamed for her own punishment. The pornographer's fear of his own sexual feelings is written implicitly in every scene in which a man binds and silences a woman. When the pornographer murders a woman, part of himself dies. Pornography, male initiation rituals, and hazing and bonding practices serve the important function of killing the girl inside, and then lay the groundwork for killing the girl outside. Pierre Bourdieu writes, "What is called courage is thus often rooted in the kind of cowardice. One has only to think of all the situations in which, to make men kill, torture, or rape, that will to dominate, exploit, or oppress has relied on the manly fear of being excluded from the world of men. Without weakness, those who are sometimes called tough, because they are tough on their own suffering and more especially on that of others, the assassins, torturers, and hitmen of all dictatorships and all total institutions, even the most ordinary ones such as prisons, barracks, or boarding schools." That's interesting. I'm reading the James Dawes book, Evil Men. That little bit was, did I say Andrea Darkin? No, I didn't say her. No. The cluster of related arguments is helpful in making sense of male sexual violence, but collectively they are also subject to three important qualifications. First, such theories have insufficient accounts of paternal love. Second, the widespread effort to understand pathological masculine identity can sometimes verge on treating such identity as a norm. As Kelly Oliver cautions, we could diagnose contemporary marginalization and exclusion using theories of identity that are built on abjection, self-creation through exclusion, but this type of identity is not the only type. A better model of identity would emphasize our essential intersubjectivity and healthful interdependence. More on this in the final pages of this book. Applied here, intersubjective theories of identity would reject the traditional psychoanalytic belief that an infant's relationship with her mother is antisocial and must be broken off, and instead view the mother as the first cooperative partner in a social relationship that makes subjectivity possible. Oh, hi, Starceres. The third limitation to these explanations of pathological masculine identity is, precisely, that there are explanations of identity. To explain rape as a behavioral norm in subcultures of war, which more is needed than an individual or identity-based account. To become a mass practice, rape must have broad organizational functions. It must be widely understood or experienced as serving a range of important purposes, psychological ones certainly, but also military, political, and cultural ones. In some case, rape can function as a combat training and unit cohesion ritual. With public rape or gang rape, for instance, new recruits are forced to permanently shed their connections to the known moral world, thereby becoming even more intensely bonded to those who share their alienation. Rape can also function as an enduring political deconstruction of enemy nationhood. In many cultures, Ruth Seifert explains, the female body functions as a symbolic representation of the body politic. The territory that nurtures us and that also needs protection is gendered female in the art and other public discourse. Because of this, the woman's body is simultaneously a physical, psychological, and cultural target. Violence inflicted on women is aimed at the physical and personal integrity of the group. This, in turn, is particularly significant for the construction of the community. Thus, the rape of the woman in community can be regarded as a symbolic rape of the body of the community. Against this background, the mass rape that accompany all wars takes on a new meaning. By no means acts of senseless brutality. They are rather cultural destroying actions with a strategic rationale. Susan Brown Miller adds, in one act of aggression, the collective spirit of women and of the nation is broken, leaving a reminder long after the troops depart. And if she survives the assault, what does the victim of wartime rape become to her people? Evidence of the enemy's bestiality, symbol of her nation's defeat, a pariah, damaged property, a pawn in the subtle wars of international propaganda. As Human Rights Watch concludes, war rape is neither incidental nor private, but rather acts as a tool for achieving specific military or political objectives. That was pretty fascinating. Yeah, that's interesting. That was interesting. On the flight home after my final interview, I read Nora Okja Keller's Comfort Women, which tells the harrowing story of Akiko, a survivor of the Japanese recreation camps. In this brutal and lyrical novel, Keller depicts the trauma of sexual violence as a matter in part of broken language. Sex slaves are not permitted to speak in code, or are murdered for speaking out. Survivors are mute, are given voice, are spoken for, or spoken over. Wives and mothers keep secrets from their families. Their daughters, they speak with the dead more clearly than with the living. And sex trafficking itself begins in lies. Lies about jobs abroad for young Korean girls in factories and restaurants. Again, this cascade of violence, language smothering moments, however, Keller offers powerful images of voices being raised, often importantly in song. Song is, in key ways, opposite to trauma. If trauma is a human experience that most impoverishes language, that reveals language poverty and translating experience, song is the human mode that most dramatically amplifies language. Hello, Snapface. That reveals language capacity to carry meaning beyond what can be translated. Even after her liberation, Akiko finds her daily life invaded by the noise of the camp. Listening to a missionary sermon, she is unable to make out words over the loud eternal echoes of slaps and bullets. But when the congregation rises to hymns, Akiko says, "What I heard after my ears cracked open was a single song, with notes so rich and varied that it sounded like many songs blended into one. And in that song, I heard things that I had almost forgotten. The enduring whisper of women who continue to pass messages under the ears of the soldiers. A defiant induct blowing the Korean national anthem, even after the soldiers had knocked her teeth out. The symphony of tens of thousands of frogs. The lullabies my mother hummed as she put her daughters to sleep. The song the river sings when she finds her freedom in the ocean. At the center of psychic survival, Comfort Women seems to say is a problem of translation in the deepest sense of the word." Now we're going back to Kaneko-san's testimony. "Children I never could do. I never could, on my own, target and shoot them. And stabbing kids with a bayonet, I've never done that a single time. I just couldn't do it to kids, but women were no problem." Later, the questions repeated to Kaneko. "There were no children, no kids." Kaneko-san pauses. "However, one thing I can say, there was just one. It happened when we went into a village, and the soldiers first set on rape. And so we went into the village, and then in China, there's something called an ondoru, a heater, you know. Inside there is a woman who is holding a child like this. And so the old soldiers and us went inside. There's a woman here, Kaneko. Pull out the kid and go out in front. When I'm done, I'll hand her over to you." And I took the kid out in front, as I was told. Then there was a woman trembling in the corner. Then what we could hear from the old soldier behind us was the old soldier's noise, his angry voice, his voice. "Do this," that sort of thing. And then after he did it for a while, we heard the woman's crying voice. And after that, after a while, the old soldier grabbed the woman's hair and came up front. "Kaneko, come with me," he said. "Yes, sir," I said, and I went with him. And then I forgot that the kid was even there. And then in a village, there is definitely always, because long ago they didn't have running water, there's always a well. He took her to where the well was. And then the old soldier pushed the woman against the well. Did it like this, you know. "Kaneko, you hold her legs. I'm holding both of the women's legs. We lift her up like that and tossed her right into the well." And at that time, and that kid, because his mother had just gotten thrown into the well, went round and round the well yelling, "Mama, Mama." But he was about 4 years old, you know. He couldn't quite reach, and there was a tapping sound, whether it was from inside the well, inside of me, or the well. I didn't want to, blah, blah. There was a tapping sound. Whether it was from inside of me or what, I didn't know. And then he had a chair, like a stand or a table that he dragged out. He used it as a stand, said, "Mama." Then he threw himself into the well, and we all had a shiver right about then, you know. Oh, this is just too much, we thought. But this thing, you know, it's always been stuck in my head. And at the end, the old soldier said, "Kaneko, throw a grenade in there." We had these hand grenades. I primed the grenade and threw it into the well, and it blew up, killed them both. And that's what happened. That has stayed inside of me to this day. That stays with me no matter what. I didn't want to kill any kids. This book is hard to read sometimes. I didn't want to kill any kids. When I shot kids, I would shoot them blindly. Break. I would close my eyes and do it. I thought it would be bad luck if I stabbed them. I intended not to kill children. However, of course, I was using a machine gun, so it was just a rat-a-tat-tat-tat, a machine gun. There were children there, and I had my eyes closed. I thought, forgive me if I hit you. That's how it was. So this next passage is from Nora Okja Keller from the book Comfort Women. My daughter does not blink. She watches me with eyes that have not found their true color, changing from blue to gray, brown to green with the light. I hold my finger in front of her nose. Still she does not blink. My finger floats towards her open eye, reaching until it touches the fringe of her lashes. Her eyes remain open with stubborn trust, and I think, how many betrayals will she endure before she loses that trust, before she wants to close her eyes and never open them again? Historian Will Durant estimates that humans have been at war for all but 268 years of the last 3.5 millennia. Jonathan Glover notes that from 1900 to 1989, 86 million people were killed in wars. There is over 100 people an hour round the clock for 90 years. Even more troubling, the wars seem to have gotten worse. At the beginning of the 20th century, approximately 95% of all casualties in war were combatants. By the end of the century, some assert the ratio had nearly reversed, with 90% civilian casualties. According to P.W. Singer, in the 10 years straddling the turn of the 25th century, 6 million children were seriously injured in war, 1 million were orphaned, 25 million were driven from their homes, and approximately 300,000 had become soldiers. He claims this last number is up from near zero a few decades earlier. In his memoir, A Long Way Home, Ishmael Bey explains that he was 12 years old in 1993 when his village was destroyed by rebel troops in Sierra Leone. By 13, he was a soldier addicted to speed, brown, cocaine mixed with gunpowder, and Rambo movies. He fought for 2 years, firing on combatants and non-combatants indiscriminately. He had no idea how many people he killed. He was, like the other boys, an effective and disposable perpetrator. As a friend of mine from the International Committee of the Red Cross once commented, children are the most dangerous because they do not know that they can die, so they fear nothing. One effective way of using them is this. If you want to draw the fire of your enemy so you can know where to aim, get a boy high and send him into the kill zone to wave his gun around and taunt the enemy. When they shoot the boy, you will know where they are. It is hard to contemplate the murder of children, especially for those who have raised them. The difficulty is, in part, emotional. Children are so vulnerable. Everything animal in us rises up to protect them. Moreover, children represent a category of personhood that is uniquely, both conceptually clear and universal. Not everyone understands what it means to be a soldier, Japanese, or a woman, for instance, but everyone has experienced from the inside what it means to be a child. The difficult of contemplating the killing of children is more than emotional in these ways. However, it is also existential. It is because when killing boys and girls, it is as if we're saying, I do not wish to destroy only those who are. I wish to destroy the possibility of all who will be. The death of a child is always a kind of apocalypse. Yes, I did snap face. Fyodor Dostoevsky is what remains one of the most searching examinations of atrocity in literary history, and insists upon thinking about children. And he insists that to think about children is to think not only about present sorrow, but also final meanings. To think, at least for people of faith, about the divine, presenting the basic puzzle of Theodicy. Dostoevsky embittered Ivan Karamazov tells his brother, the monk, the story of a small girl who was brutally tortured by her own mother and father. They trap her overnight in a frozen privy and force her to eat excrement. Can you understand that a little being who still can't even comprehend what is being done to her in a vile place, in the dark and cold, beats herself with her tiny little fists on the strained little chest and cries her bloody, unresentful, meek little tears to dear God to protect her? Can you understand that nonsense? My friend and my brother, my pious and humble novice, do you understand why this is nonsense, is necessary and created? What kind of God would allow this? Ivan asks. Would you? How could you bear it? What kind of God could bear it? For many, the idea that God arises in wrath afterward to punish those who perpetrate such evils is emotionally satisfying. It restores our injured sense of justice. Our sense of the universe must have balance. But Ivan is not satisfied by this. Eternal hell for evildoers doesn't provide relief for the tortured little girl, he argues. It only increases the amount of suffering among the created. What kind of God would consent to be the architect of a world organized around pointless pain and disproportionate retribution? Why, Ivan asks, should such a world exist at all? Has some vast imbecility, Thomas Hardy asks, mighty to build and blend, be impotent to trend, framed us in jest, and left us now to hazardry? Or are we the playthings of a vengeful God who calls us, thou suffering thing? Know that thy sorrow is my ecstasy, that thy love loss is my hate's profiting. The latter, at least, would be the kind of comfort for Hardy. Then would I bear it, clench myself and die, steeled by the sense of ire unmerited, half eased in the power fuller than I had willed and meted me the tears I shed. But no, Hardy writes, our lot is much worse than that. Our suffering is only the matter of hap or chance, the arbitrary dicing of purblind doomsters. Why would such a world exist at all? There is no reason. We are absurdly meaning-seeking creatures in a meaningless world. War starts often over the need to believe in transcendent things, sometimes the idea of God, sometimes the idea of sacred people. The men I spoke to believed, as so many before and will hence, that they were serving divine purpose when they sacrificed themselves to war. The emperor was the descendant of the gods. Sometimes campaigns of this sort vivify belief in the divine, particularly for the victors, or on the home fronts that have remained safe from attack. But sometimes they make belief very hard, even for the most doggedly faithful. How can our concept of God survive a world where evil falls upon the heads of the innocent? Lord, when will you hearken to my prayers? Cries the protagonist from Hanjin's Nanjing Requiem. When will you show your wrath? In the Anglo-American tradition, recent religio-philosophical discussions of Ivan Karamazov's problem of evil often cite as a starting point J. L. Mackey's seminal essay, Evil and Omnipotence. Mackey argued bluntly that we shouldn't believe in God, not because religious beliefs lack rational support, as had often been argued, but because the existence of evil shows us that religious beliefs are positively irrational. Crisply summarizing the argument, philosopher Susan Neiman writes, the problem of evil occurs when you try to maintain three propositions that don't fit together. Evil exists, God is benevolent, God is omnipotent. Bend, maul, and move them as you will. They cannot be held in union. One of them has to go. As David Hume asks, is he willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Whence then is evil? The problem of evil is often presented as if it is only a matter of logical contradiction, that the force of it is emotional. We can imagine a cruel God creating a world as appalling as this, the argument goes, and we can imagine an incompetent God doing so. But any reasonable, all-powerful God, foreseeing what this particular version of creation would lead to, would have scrapped the whole thing before starting. Surely there was a better option, and if there wasn't, why need a being at all? Over the centuries, people of faith, people for whom God represents the final possibility of hope, meaning, or redemption, have struggled to find a response adequate to the grief-stricken charge. In the early 18th century, Gottfried Leibniz invented the word, I can't even say this word, theodicy? Okay, guys, I can't say this word, and I don't want to pronounce it to you wrong. We're going to have to Google Translate this. English. One second. I'm not gonna say a word if I don't know how to say it. Theodicy. Okay, theodicy. Gottfried Leibniz invented the word theodicy to describe these efforts to defend God, these attempts to justify the ways of God to man. As John Milton audaciously wrote, Leibniz argued the creation proceeds according to divine plan. That which seems senseless, intolerable, or evil only seems so from the limited mortal perspective in time. We inhabit the best of all possible worlds. Things are as they must be. Hume imagined a handful of improvements, including the removal of pain as the source of human motivation, to be replaced by pleasure. But Leibniz believed any repair we might imagine for the perceived damage of creation would only worsen matters in ways we are simply incapable of understanding, giving our hopelessly narrow vision in a hopelessly vast universe. Or they would be impossible, just as God couldn't, for instance, make a person who is taller than himself, or make it the case that bachelors are also married. God also couldn't make a universe that is logically impossible. In other words, God couldn't make a universe of free souls who aren't free to harm each other. All are but parts of one stupendous whole, whose body's nature is, and God the soul, wrote Leibniz near contemporary Alexander Pope, one of England's most celebrated poets. Pope made Leibniz the Odyssey, the centerpiece of his philosophical poem, An Essay on Man, from 1733, in which he insisted even that history's perpetrators fit into God's plan. If plagues or earthquakes break heaven's design, why then Borgia or Catiline? All nature is but art, unknown to thee, all chance, direction, which thou canst not see, all discord, harmony, not understood, all partial evil, universal good. In spite of pride and erring reason's spite, one truth is clear, whatever is right. Pope has been reveled for his theodicy and characterized as a facile optimist, most famously by Voltaire. But Pope knew suffering. As a boy, he was afflicted with tuberculosis of the spine, an incurable disease that made him shrink during adolescence rather than grow, and that gave to 4.5 feet as an adult, and that gave him a limp, a curved spine, a visually humped back, and lifelong pain. Suffering was a mystery Pope knew he would never understand, but what that failure to see was the fault of his blindness, not God's design. For many theologians and philosophers, from Augustine to John Milton to C.S. Lewis, the explanation for our pain is found in our freedom. Suffering is the price we pay for our free will, which is the gift God gives us to make our lives meaningful, in which we have abused awfully. With our freedom, we have fallen into evil and anguish. Made perfect, we have sinned ourselves into a new species, becoming, as Lewis writes, a horror to God. We mustn't believe that our false surprise God, a version of the incompetent God argument. Rather, our fall, with all of its attendant sorrows, is a purposeful and productive tragedy. The freedom that would bring us to evil and pain would also deepen our being, bringing us out of the ignorant innocence of a spiritual childhood, as William Blake expressed it, into an organized innocence of developed adult consciousness. Augustine writes, as a runaway horse is better than a stone which does not run away because it lacks self-movement and sense perception, so the creature is more excellent which sins by free will than by which does not sin only because it has no free will. A world of free sinful souls is more perfect than a world of sinless slaves. For such thinkers, therefore, it is puzzling to imagine a loving God creating a world of suffering and torment. The seemingly gratuitous pain of being is, in fact, intelligible. Our suffering is the natural consequence of God's stern, uncompromising, and demanding love. Suffering is God's instrument of correction. Suffering alerts us to his displeasure. The trial of suffering refines us spiritually. Suffering is required for the existence of certainly high valuable goods. For instance, moral displays of grace and courage, or the experience of loving support and solidarity in grief. Perhaps it is required even for the existence of the idea of good itself. Indeed, Mary McCord Adam argues that suffering is an aspect of God, that the capacity of each individual to realize incommensurate good of beatific union with the Creator involves coming to understand the agony that is, and the Christian tradition that she represents manifests in the crucifixion. As early as the 2nd century, the early Christian church, Father St. Irenaeus, argued that the sorrows and adversities of earthly life are the very things that forge us into the likeness of God. The world, writes John Keats, is a veil of soul-making. Indeed, hell itself, as Dante writes in the Inferno, is scourged not only by justice, but also by primal love. In other words, even the final torture house of the damned is an aspect of infinitely loving gifts of free will that alone allows for the soul's glory. I know this. I see. This is good that we're dissecting this, Star Series. You have a good point. Why are we using Western philosophy to discuss Asian? This might be a downfall of the book, but it might be the way that the author was trying to justify what he was hearing. You know what I mean? There are also a host of ways to justify suffering, even ultimate suffering, but there are also a host of ways to negate such justifications. One might argue, for instance, that if the very mean of creation hinges upon the idea of free will, then we free wills ought to be very free indeed, far more free than the genetically programmed, culturally conditioned, historically positioned, family fated, information deprived, resource craving, hormonally charged, chemically vulnerable, weak willed beings that we are. Our freedom, indeed, seems a relatively feeble concept, rather like the freedom of the 3-year-old child in Adam Stove's analogy. A mother puts her 3-year-old child into a gas filled room, the analogy goes, and then before leaving warns the child not to fiddle with the attractive, brightly colored knobs that will, when turned on, light the burners and ignite the gas, severely burning the child. Obviously, the mother cannot absolve herself of responsibility for the predictable explosion and consequent suffering simply by hanging it upon the child's free will choice, nor can God. And there is, of course, the moral incoherence of what might be called punishment theodicy. In Albert Camus's The Plague, Father Painleau argues his congregants to rejoice, yes, rejoice. The same pestilence which is slaying you works for your good. It is a red spear sternly pointing to the narrow path, the one of salvation. Many religious justifications, especially Star Sirius, because Japan is not a religious country. Neither is Asia. They follow more of like, you know, ideological schools of thought than they do religion. Many religious justifications of suffering, including those I've just summarized, imply a link between pain and sin, and by extension, therefore, between happiness and virtue. Set aside the empirical implausibility of such thinking. The idea, for instance, that a virtuous people need not fear plague. The deeper problem is that imagining virtue can protect you from suffering perverts virtue, at least according to Immanuel Kant. The idea of virtue as holy shield makes virtue into something we embody, not for itself, but for its instrumental value as a matter of self-protection, even self-interested calculation. Is virtue really virtue when it's good strategy? For Kant, Neiman writes, theodicy was awfully impious. Finally, there is the problem of logical impossibility for an omnipotent being. As Mackey asks, this guy must be really religious, and I'm only saying it because I liked how the book described certain things to help understand this, but we're talking way too much about Western philosophy and religion for it to help, like, a little bit to help Western readers kind of comprehend this, but we're going way too far. This seems like the writer's personal journey here. Now I lost my point. Finally, there is the problem of logical impossibility from omnipotent beings, as Mackey asks. Can an omnipotent being make beings which he cannot subsequently control, or what is the practically equivalent to this? Can an omnipotent being make rules which then bind himself? Both yes and no fail as answers to both questions. Mackey argues that we must therefore reject the concept of God's omnipotence, or the idea that we are free. Both can't be true at the same time. I wish to believe. It is absurd in the existential sense, but I cannot do anything else. I am the father of 2 small boys. I, like every parent, have known the terror of not being able to find my children, have imagined with sick horror that they might be frightened or lonely or hurt, and that I cannot get to them. This is not be born. It is simply impossible to endure the thought that I will someday be kept from them forever. It is impossible to tolerate the idea that their small lives ultimately have no point. Sometimes late at night, and I watch them sleep in the darkness, I let myself think this. It makes me lurch, hits me like a spasm of nausea. Discussing God and the problem of evil, Hume notes that pleasure and pain are not experientially binaries. The heights of pleasure are difficult to achieve and degenerate rapidly. The depths of pain are swiftly entered and difficult to escape. He writes, were a stranger to drop on a sudden into the world, I would show him as a specimen of its ills, a hospital full of diseases, a prison crowded with malefactors and debtors, a field of battle strewed with carcasses, a fleet floundering in the ocean, a nation languishing under tyranny, famine, or pestilence. To turn the gay side of life to him and give him a notion of its pleasures, whither should I conduct him? to a ball, to an opera, to court, he must justly think that I was only showing him a diversity of distress and sorrow. In his grimly titled Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence, contemporary philosopher David Benatar takes the asymmetry of pleasure and pain. The absence of pain is good. The absence of pleasure is not bad, as an argument against having babies. Although our potential offspring may not regret coming into existence, he argues, they certainly would not regret not coming to existence. Humans, it seems, are designed to suffer. Psychologists today suggest that stress has a stronger physiological effect on people than relaxation. Anticipated negative events have a stronger effect on mood than anticipated positive events. Bad parenting has a stronger effect than good parenting, and our default experience of physiological arousal may be negative rather than positive. Most dismaying, there is no such thing as opposite to trauma. That is, there is no concept of a positive event. In all the range of human experience, they can have a long-lasting, comprehensive, and severe an effect on human behavior as trauma. My boys, Mikey and Topher, are afraid to sleep alone in their bedroom. Each night after tucking, they creep into the same bed together for comfort, leaving one empty. They always ask me to stay, so I sit on the floor until their bodies go still and their breathing deepens, holding a book up against the nightlight and quietly turning pages. I would then sleep, and I yearn, with Ivan Karamazov, for the goodness of God. Oh, this is such a wordy section. Hi, Ron. Ron. I know this is interesting, but a star seer said too much Western philosophy. My friend Barb read the previous section before publication and chided me for its despair. You are a teacher in college, she reminded me. What are you teaching in your classes? I have often joked that I try to teach a touch of despair to the optimistic, idealistic, soon to change the world students in my human rights classes. I think of it as an inoculation against disappointment, an advanced preparation for the harsh realities of human rights work that they will prepare them to better adapt when they, inevitably, experience helplessness, disappointment, or failure while in the field. Idealists shatter, I argue, realists trudge on, but Barb is making me rethink this. Around the time of her remarks, I was reading Terry Eagleton's On Evil, which takes the argument that evil is the desire for non-being through destruction. Beneath his argument, it seemed to me, was the implication that despair, as a form of world renunciation, reproduces the structure of evil. Is there a reason for despair now? According to the Human Security Report in 2005, there may not be. The report claims that the most common statistics about how war and violence are getting worse over time, like the ones I cited earlier, are myths, evidence-light or evidence-free assertions that have acquired the solidity of political facts only because they have been repeated so frequently. On the contrary, the report argues things are getting better, and not because of random swing in the world's historical patterns. It's because humanity has begun to create durable organizational structures for mitigating and preventing violence around the globe. The report asserts a correlation between the post-1990s plummeting in the number of armed conflicts, politicides, genocides, and battle deaths, and the corresponding rise in the number of United Nations peacekeeping activities, preventing diplomatic missions and economic sanctions in place around the world. In the better angels of our nature, Steven Pinker argues more ambitiously that violence has declined dramatically over the broad sweep of human history. Yeah, right. Like the Chinese are setting up cuddle huts for the freaking weaker population. Sorry, Stephen. He attributes this to, among other things, the advances of Enlightenment humanism. Okay. Another recent study provides striking evidence for the aptness of nonviolence as a tactic for human political organization. Analyzing 323 violent and nonviolent resistant campaigns from 1900 to 2006, Marianne Stefan and Erica Chenoweth discovered that nonviolent campaigns were twice as likely to achieve strategic objectives as violent campaigns. We may have a reason to be more optimistic about our collective future than our most commonly traded statistics suggest. We may also have reason to be more optimistic about the experience of human entirety than the psychological studies above suggest. Perhaps we are not designed to suffer. We may have experienced our negative memories more intensely, but we remember a higher proportion of positive events and are able to access them more quickly. People's self-conceptions are more often than not positive, often realistically so, and in certain circumstances, their positive emotion seems to have a greater capacity for contagiously spreading the negative ones. And while we certainly do suffer, many studies suggest that our suffering promotes increased social activity. Does suffering increase social activity? I don't know. I seem to be a lot busier when I'm suffering. Many studies suggest that our suffering promotes increased social activity, affiliation, and even altruism. Experimental psychologists also note that it is more difficult to induce bad moods in subjects than good ones, and that it is even harder to sustain them. For this reason, according to Shelley Taylor, experiments are often set up to compare positive and neutral rather than positive and negative moods. Humans, naturally resilient, are equipped with a number of highly effective, sometimes automatic strategies for minimizing the experience of bad events. Thank God, a strong parallel doesn't appear to exist for our experience of positive events. Because of the microwave? Really? That's funny. Writing at the close of the 19th century, the American philosopher William James, there's another American philosopher there, Esther Sears, argued that certain facts in the world can only come into being if a preliminary faith in them exists. To paraphrase James, a declaration of faith in one athlete's ability can help to make real the athlete's power. We are therefore justified in adopting beliefs without sufficient evidence, a belief in God, for instance, or in ourselves, because of what adopting the belief can cause. He uses a striking analogy to explain the possibilities of belief. A whole train of passengers, individually brave enough, will be eluded by a few highwaymen, simply because the latter can count on one another, while each passenger fears that if he makes a movement of resistance, he will be shot before anyone else backs him up. If we believe that the whole carful would rise at once with us, we should each severely rise, and train robbing would never even be attempted. In other words, to despair is to make a decision with consequences. That seems like a good spot to stop. We're on page 115. We're so close to being done. So we only have that much of the book, this much. So I think 3 more days will be done. Yeah, that was painful to read. Not because I'm not religious, just because, like, it's Western philosophy against Asian that's, like, black and white. I know, cuddle huts. I don't think violence has declined. Not at all. I don't know what kind of sparkles and unicorns they're hanging out with. Where has violence declined? I feel like the author just ruined the book talking about all that Western philosophy. Hopefully he's done. I'm sorry, what's his name? James Dawes, that you had to justify this horrible project that you put yourself through by your religious conversation, like, to make yourself feel better. Sometimes people are just evil. But if we just accept them as just evil, are we really, like, absorbing the trueness of the event that happened? I don't think violence has declined at all. Oh, that's that would have been a freaking, what is that called? What is that called? Copyright claim there. Okay, so we're almost done with the book. It looks like we're going to more interviews now. I have a more interesting book I want to read after this. This one's more exciting. Where is it? Damn it, I might have moved it. Yeah, I think I moved the book, guys. Ooh, we can read this one, Factories of Death. Oh, man. I have so much to do today. I have to go to the store. Well, I didn't get the one job that I thought I got. That sucks. Oh well. I will just be jobless forever. Damn, I really thought I was going to get that job. That was like a perfect job. Damn. Well, I guess there's no reason to get depressed. Oh, man. Well, I'm glad you all enjoyed the book reading. Man, I can't believe I didn't get that job. I just want to make my own money. I want to be able to pay my bills on time and be able to pay all of them. Hopefully, Susan. Man, I really thought I had that job. It's a competitive. There's tons of jobs, but nobody talks about like how competitive it is for the workers to get a job. Yeah, everywhere is hiring, but everybody's looking for a job too. So there's going to be, it's not just competitive for like the employers. Like I have a fucking sick resume. I'm hoping I get the one that I just applied for. Damn, I really thought I got that one. Well, back to the drawing board, I guess. Yeah, you can see how my mood just went downhill real quick, right? Okay, well, I thank you everyone for sitting another reading for me. I wonder who else is watching because there's only so many people that chat, but then there's other people watching. Who are you? But thank you for coming. I don't know if I'm doing anything with Ron soon. I think Ron pretty much probably left. He probably said hi, and then when I was reading a book, he just like bounced. But yeah, I got all done up to do this video. You're welcome, Susan, this video interview. And now I'm probably going to go to Target. You're welcome, Snapface. You should be sleeping. And yeah, see what's up. So you guys have a great day. I love everyone. Thank you. Also, I'm going to be making a new video soon. I'm going to show you the new video that I'm going to be working on soon. God, where's this damn video? It's going to be the otaku killer. So wait till you hear this story, guys. But thank you for listening, Star Sears, Talana, Susan, Shelby, Snapface, Charlotte. I know there was a few other people. JJSW, Ron, Cherry. I'm pretty sure Ron already left. He's probably like, nope. So I will see you later. I love you guys. Bye.